Ethan Carter was a man who had everything: money, power, and an entourage of so-called friends who surrounded him like moths drawn to a flame. At just 35, he was the CEO of a thriving investment firm, driving the latest sports cars and throwing extravagant parties that had the entire city talking. His mansion, a glass-walled masterpiece perched on the hills, was never empty. Every night, laughter and music echoed through its grand halls, and people toasted to his success. But beneath the flashing cameras and endless champagne, there was a truth Ethan ignored. None of these people were truly his friends. They were there for the lifestyle, the luxury, and the money. They laughed at his jokes, even the bad ones. They cheered for him, but only when he was winning. In his heart, he knew it, but he refused to face it. One evening, Ethan sat on his balcony, overlooking the city skyline. He swirled the whiskey in his glass as a cold breeze kissed his face. Beside him, his closest friend, at least, that's what he thought, Michael leaned back in his chair, laughing. "Man, you've got it all," Michael said, exhaling a puff of expensive Cuban cigar smoke. "You're the king of this city." Ethan smirked. "And you're my right-hand man." Michael clinked his glass against Ethan's. To wealth. They drank. But Ethan didn't know that this toast was empty, like all the others before it. Weeks passed, and Ethan continued his extravagant lifestyle, throwing money around like it would never run dry. Lavish vacations, designer suits, expensive gifts for friends, it all seemed limitless. Then, the storm hit. One morning, Ethan was jolted awake by his assistant's frantic call. "Sir, we have a problem. The stock market crashed overnight. Our investments, they're gone." Ethan shot up in bed. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" "I mean, sir, we're bankrupt." The words didn't register at first. It had to be a mistake. How could he, Ethan Carter, lose everything overnight? He rushed to his office, making frantic calls, demanding answers, but the reality was undeniable. His company was in ruins, his accounts were bleeding, and debts piled up like a towering inferno. That night, Ethan held an emergency gathering at his mansion. He needed his friends now more than ever. They always had his back, at least, that's what he believed. But as he looked around the room, the people he called his friends exchanged uneasy glances. Michael, the one he trusted most, spoke first. "Look, Ethan, we've had a good run, but, maybe it's time to lay low for a while. I mean, people aren't exactly looking to be around bad luck." Ethan's chest tightened. "Bad luck? I thought we were a team, a family." Michael shrugged, finishing his drink. "It's just business, man. Nothing personal." One by one, the others made their excuses and left. Some didn't even bother. The ones who had sworn loyalty, the ones who had once praised him, the ones who had benefited the most from his generosity, gone. By morning, Ethan was alone in his mansion. No calls, no texts, no visitors. His assistant quit. His mansion was soon listed for foreclosure. His luxury cars were repossessed. And as he stood in the empty house, stripped of all its lavish decorations, the silence was deafening. He was no longer Ethan Carter, the powerful CEO. He was just a man, a broke, abandoned man. Ethan stood in the center of his once glorious mansion, now stripped of everything that once made it feel alive. The grand chandelier that had bathed the room in golden light was gone. The velvet curtains had been removed. The marble floors, once walked on by celebrities and high-profile businessmen, now seemed colder than ever. A knock at the door echoed through the empty house. He knew who it was before he even answered. A man in a black suit stood on the porch, holding a clipboard. "Mr. Carter, your time is up. The bank has finalized the foreclosure." Ethan clenched his jaw. "Can't you give me a little more time?" The man sighed, shaking his head. "I'm sorry, sir. You need to vacate the premises immediately." And just like that, the last remnant of his old life was gone. With no mansion, no luxury car, and no money, Ethan was forced to move into a rundown motel on the outskirts of the city. The room smelled of mildew, the wallpaper peeled off in jagged strips, and the flickering light bulb above his bed cast eerie shadows on the stained carpet. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his reflection in the cracked mirror. The man who once wore tailored suits and designer watches was now in wrinkled clothes that barely fit. His eyes, once sharp with confidence, were now filled with exhaustion and disbelief. Then came the real struggle. With no income and no one willing to lend him a helping hand, Ethan was forced to take a job at a small diner, far from the high-rise offices he once commanded. He walked into the establishment, the scent of grease and coffee filling his nostrils. An older man with a gruff expression eyed him up and down. "You ever washed dishes before?" Ethan hesitated. "No, but I can learn." The man scoffed. "Rich boy like you willing to get his hands dirty?" Ethan swallowed his pride. "I just need a chance." "Fine. Aprons in the back. Get to work." The job was humiliating. He scrubbed plates, took out the trash, and cleaned up after people who wouldn't even give him a second glance. He overheard customers laughing about some rich guy who lost it all. He bit his tongue when he heard his former friends' names being mentioned in conversations about new parties and exclusive events, ones he was no longer invited to. One night, exhausted and covered in grease, he walked home in the freezing rain. His shoes, once worth more than most people's monthly rent, were now soaked and falling apart. As he turned the corner toward his motel, he spotted a familiar face. Michael, dressed in a sharp suit, stepping out of a brand new car, laughing with a group of people, his new friends. Ethan's stomach twisted, but he kept walking. He wanted to confront him, to ask how he could have abandoned him so easily, but deep down, he already knew the answer. Michael had never been a true friend. None of them had. As the weeks passed, the hardships didn't stop. His body ached from long hours at the diner. His stomach growled on nights he couldn't afford more than a packet of instant noodles. Some nights, he barely had enough money to keep his motel room. Then came the lowest point. One night, as he was leaving work, he heard voices behind him. "Hey, rich boy," a voice sneered. Ethan turned to see three men approaching him, rough, street-hardened, and dangerous. He recognized them. They had once tried to get into his exclusive parties, but he had turned them away. "Looks like you're not so rich anymore," one of them smirked. "Where's your bodyguards now?" Before Ethan could react, a fist slammed into his gut, knocking the air from his lungs. He staggered back, but another punch caught his jaw, sending him to the ground. They kicked him, stole what little money he had, and left him lying in the cold alley, bleeding and broken. As he lay there, staring up at the dark sky, reality hit him harder than any punch ever could. He was truly alone, but he wasn't dead, and if he was still alive, that meant he could still fight. Ethan gritted his teeth, wiped the blood from his face, and forced himself to his feet. He wasn't done yet. Ethan limped back to his motel, his body aching from the brutal attack. Every step sent a sharp pain through his ribs, but he refused to stop. He had hit rock bottom, beaten, broke, and abandoned, but something inside him refused to die. He sat on the edge of his stained mattress, staring at the flickering light above him. The anger burned deep, not just at the people who left him, but at himself. He had built his life on a foundation of wealth and illusion, and now that it had crumbled, he was left with nothing. But there was still one thing no one could take from him, his mind. For the next few days, despite the pain, Ethan forced himself to think. He analyzed every mistake he had made, every wasted dollar, every bad investment. He realized that his downfall hadn't just been because of the stock market crash. It had been his arrogance, his blind trust in fake friends, and his reckless spending. It was time to rebuild. With what little money he had left, he bought an old, second-hand laptop and started researching. He read about business turnarounds, investments, and financial discipline. He studied the habits of self-made billionaires, real ones, not the ones who relied on inherited wealth. But studying wasn't enough. He needed money. One night, while cleaning the diner, he overheard the owner grumbling. "Damn suppliers keep raising prices. We're barely making a profit." A spark lit in Ethan's mind. He had once negotiated multi-million-dollar deals. Surely, he could handle something as small as supply costs. "Let me help," Ethan said. The owner raised an eyebrow. "You? What do you know about this?" Ethan wiped his hands on his apron. "I used to run a company worth millions. I know how to negotiate." The old man scoffed. "Yeah? And look where you ended up." Ethan didn't flinch. "Give me a chance. If I can cut your costs, let me keep a percentage of the savings." The owner thought for a moment, then sighed. "Fine. But if you screw this up, you're out." Ethan got to work. He contacted every supplier, renegotiated deals, and found better alternatives. Within a week, he had slashed the diner's costs by 30%. The owner, impressed, gave him his cut, a few $100s. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Word spread. Other small businesses began asking for his help. Ethan realized he could turn this into something real. He worked tirelessly, taking on more clients, building connections, and saving every penny he made. He lived frugally, no luxury, no unnecessary spending. Every cent went into his new business. But success didn't come easy. One day, while meeting a client in a coffee shop, he ran into Michael. "Ethan," Michael smirked, dressed in his expensive suit. "Didn't expect to see you here. What are you doing? Working as a barista now?" Ethan clenched his fists, but kept his cool. "No. I'm rebuilding my life." Michael chuckled. "Man, just accept it. You had your time at the top, but that's over. Nobody's gonna take you seriously now." Ethan met his gaze. "We'll see." Michael laughed and walked away, but Ethan wasn't angry. If anything, he was more determined than ever. Months passed. His consulting business grew. He moved out of the motel into a small apartment. He started dressing better, regaining his confidence. Then, one day, an opportunity came that would change everything. A struggling tech startup approached him, desperate for financial guidance. They had a great product but no idea how to manage their money. Ethan saw potential. Instead of charging a fee, he made a bold move. I don't want money up front, he told them. I want equity. It was a risk, but one he was willing to take. He poured everything into the company, using his experience to streamline their operations, attract investors, and grow their market presence. Months turned into a year, and against all odds, the startup took off. Their value skyrocketed, and with his equity, Ethan found himself back in the game. But this time, he was smarter. This time, he wouldn't let history repeat itself. Ethan's rise wasn't just about regaining money, it was about rebuilding himself from the ground up. He was no longer the reckless billionaire who threw money around carelessly. Every dollar he made now had a purpose. Every move he made was calculated. The tech startup he had invested in became a massive success. Ethan's strategic decisions, financial expertise, and ruthless discipline turned it from a struggling business into a dominant force in the industry. With his shares skyrocketing in value, he was once again a millionaire. But this time, he was smarter. No flashy parties. No fake friends. No unnecessary luxuries. Ethan moved into a simple yet elegant apartment, preferring functionality over extravagance. Instead of throwing his money away on people who didn't care about him, he focused on reinvesting, expanding his consulting firm, and helping small businesses grow. He was no longer just a wealthy man, he was a strategist, a mentor, and a survivor. But as success returned, so did the people who had abandoned him. One evening, while attending a business gala, Ethan noticed familiar faces in the crowd, former friends who had once laughed at his downfall. They whispered among themselves, stealing glances in his direction. Some looked surprised to see him thriving again. Others looked nervous. Then, he saw Michael, dressed in an expensive suit. Drink in hand, Michael smirked as he approached. Ethan, he said smoothly, as if nothing had ever happened. It's been a while. Ethan sipped his whiskey, unimpressed. It has. Michael chuckled. Man, I have to say, I didn't expect to see you back at the top so soon. But I always knew you had it in you. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Is that right? Of course. Michael patted him on the shoulder. We should catch up. Maybe work together again. Like old times. Ethan stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he leaned in slightly and spoke in a calm, controlled voice. You weren't there when I had nothing, Michael. So you don't get to be here now. Michael's smirk disappeared. Ethan finished his drink and walked away, leaving Michael standing there, stunned. He didn't feel anger or bitterness, just clarity. That night, Ethan realized something important. Wealth had never been the problem. It was the people he surrounded himself with. And this time, he would choose wisely. His journey wasn't just about regaining fortune. It was about regaining himself. Ethan Carter had everything again. But this time, it was on his terms. His consulting empire had expanded beyond expectations, with businesses across different industries seeking his expertise. His wealth returned, but he didn't flaunt it. The old Ethan would have celebrated with a wild party, inviting people who only cared about his money. The new Ethan spent his time mentoring young entrepreneurs, investing in struggling businesses, and helping those who truly needed a second chance, just like he once did. One afternoon, he took a walk through the city, reflecting on his journey. He passed the luxury hotels where he had once thrown extravagant parties. He saw the exclusive clubs where he had spent thousands on people who no longer acknowledged his existence. None of it mattered anymore. Then, fate tested him one last time. As he stepped into a cafe, he saw a man sitting alone at a table, his head in his hands. The suit he wore was wrinkled, his once polished shoes scuffed. It was Michael. Ethan ordered his coffee and took a seat nearby, waiting. After a few moments, Michael noticed him and looked away ashamed. How's business? Ethan asked, taking a sip of his drink. Michael exhaled, rubbing his temples. It's over. The deals dried up. The investments failed. The same people who once called me their brother won't even pick up my calls now. Ethan leaned back, studying him. Michael let out a bitter laugh. I guess I finally understand what you went through. For a long time, Ethan said nothing. The old version of himself would have relished this moment, seeing Michael brought down the way he once had been. But revenge didn't interest him anymore. You thought wealth made you powerful, Ethan finally said. But it only amplifies who you already are. When you lost everything, you had no foundation to stand on. Michael nodded slowly. I was a fool. Ethan placed his card on the table. There's a company looking for a financial advisor. They need someone experienced. Michael looked up in shock. You'd help me? After everything. Ethan stood up. I don't hold grudges, Michael. But don't mistake this for friendship. It's a lesson. Learn from it, or you'll end up right back here. Without another word, he walked out. As he stepped onto the sidewalk, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Peace. He had lost everything. He had been humiliated, abandoned, and left for dead. But he had fought, rebuilt, and emerged stronger than ever. This time, Ethan Carter wasn't just rich. He was wise. The end.